The night had no color, just shades of gray bleeding into black, the kind of darkness that swallowed sound before it could travel far. At 0217 hours, the Kunar province was a held-breath mountains pressing down from every direction, the air thin and cold enough to sting the inside of your lungs with every inhale. She was already prone when the radio crackled. Staff Sergeant Leland Harwick's voice came through in pieces, each transmission shorter than the last. Each one carrying that particular compression of a man who has stopped asking whether he will survive and started calculating how much longer he can hold. His words were barely words anymore, more like proof. Proof that he was still there. Proof that someone needed to come. Sarah Quinn did not answer the radio. She lay flat against the broken stone of the observation tower, her right cheek pressed to the cold stock of her Macmillan TAC-3 3.8. The rifle's bipod extended across a lip of crumbled masonry that overlooked the valley floor 800 meters below. Her breath moved in a slow, disciplined rhythm, 4 counts in hold, 8 counts out, the kind of breathing that takes years to build into reflex and a lifetime to understand why it matters. Through the thermal scope, the valley was full of light, small lights, moving lights, 12 of them. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. That was the thing nobody in that operations room had believed 6 hours ago. Her finger rested outside the trigger guard, waiting. On the radio, Callis said something that wasn't quite a sentence. Then Harwick's voice again, shorter this time, down to syllables. Sarah Quinn exhaled slowly, completely the way her father had taught her on a stretch of flat Texas scrubland when she was 9 years old and the rifle was bigger than her arms were long. Don't pull it. Let it break. Her finger moved inside the guard, cut to black. 6 hours earlier, nobody in that operations room believed she would step outside the wire. FO Blessing sat in the Kunar Valley like something the mountain had coughed up and forgotten. A cluster of HESCO barriers, prefab structures, and antenna arrays jammed into a narrow strip of terrain that military planners had selected because there were no good options, only less terrible ones. The forward operating base had been active since 2006, and 3 years of continuous occupation had given it the particular texture of a place that has absorbed too many rotations, too many close calls, too many nights that started with a mission brief and ended with a medevac. It was 1948 hours when the Black Hawk set down on the landing pad and Sarah Quinn stepped off. She was 32 years old, 5 feet 6 inches, with gray eyes that had the quality of looking slightly past whatever they were focused on, as if processing something at a distance no one else could see. Her kit was worn, the kind of worn that comes from use, not neglect. Every piece of gear showing the specific marks of a person who had adjusted it exactly once and never changed it again because it worked. The rifle case on her back was olive drab, no unit patches, no identifying marks. She carried it the way you carry something you have carried so long that the weight has become part of how you stand. She cleared the rotor wash, set her boots on solid ground, and took 1 full second to read the base. That was the first thing Corporal Tad Gifford noticed about her. Not her size or her gender or the single silver maple leaf on her collar. He was watching from the vehicle bay with a coffee he had been reheating for 40 minutes, and what caught his attention was that pause. 1 second, no more. The way a person looks at a room before they walk into it, like she was calculating something the rest of them had stopped calculating years ago. He did not say anything. He just watched. Derek Sloan did not watch quietly. Sloan was standing at the edge of the landing pad with 2 other operators from Recon Shadow, the FOB's special reconnaissance element, and he made no effort to lower his voice when he said it. That's our new commander. The way he said commander, not with contempt exactly, but with a particular kind of flatness that was worse than contempt. The flatness of a man who has already made a decision and is not interested in new information. The man beside him, a broad-shouldered operator named Kettner, looked over and then looked away. Kettner was the kind of person who did not comment on things he considered obvious. The third man, Marcus Holt, said nothing. Marcus Holt rarely said anything. He was 41 years old, 15 years in the field, with a face that had the quality of a map, not aged exactly, but detailed in a way that suggested a long journey rather than simple time. He stood slightly apart from the other 2, watching Sarah Quinn cross the pad, and whatever he was thinking, he kept it behind his eyes where it had always lived. Sarah did not look at any of them. She walked straight to the operations center, a reinforced room carved into the hillside, smelling of diesel fuel and old coffee and the specific dry sweat odor of men who had not had reliable hot water in 2 weeks. Captain Grant Fowler was standing over a topographic map when she entered, his back to the door, which was either a professional courtesy or a deliberate slight. With Fowler, the difference was often academic. He was 45, built like a man who had been big in his 30s and had kept enough of it that you still took him seriously with close-cropped gray at his temples and a jaw that appeared to be locked at rest. 20 years in conventional infantry, first then special operations, the kind of career arc that produced a certain type of officer, one who had seen enough to trust his own judgment, absolutely, and had been wrong rarely enough to never seriously question that trust. He turned when Sarah set her rifle case against the wall. Commander Quinn, he made the rank correct and nothing else. Captain Fowler, she stepped to the map without being invited. Situation report. A half-second of silence. In that half-second, several things happened that only Fowler would have been able to identify. His first instinct to establish that this was his operations center, his base, his protocols ran directly into the fact that she outranked him and that her personnel file, which he had read that afternoon, described a combat record that made the instinct feel small. He folded his arms instead. 6-man recon element, he said. Shadow 2, operating 15 clicks, northeast grid, Charlie 7. They walked into a coordinated ambush approximately 40 minutes ago. Current count 12 hostiles, PKMs, at least 1 RPG. 2 wounded. Callis and Gifford's team medic have minor injuries. Harwick is critical. Abdomen loss, significant blood tourniquet on, but it is not enough. Sarah was looking at the map. She traced the terrain with one finger, not touching it, hovering just above it, moving along the ridgeline northeast of the base. Extraction plan. Standard procedure. Artillery preparation request submitted, estimated approval in battery setup 45 minutes. Birds in once the area is soft. 2 hours total. They do not have 2 hours. Fowler's jaw tightened slightly. That is the process, Commander. I am not questioning the process. She looked up. I am telling you the math. Harwick is on a tourniquet in cold weather at altitude. His core temp is dropping. At the rate he is losing pressure, 45 minutes is already too long. 2 hours is a eulogy. The room had 3 other personnel in it, a comms operator, an intelligence analyst, and a logistics sergeant who had been pretending to work for the last 60 seconds. None of them moved. Fowler said, we do not run hasty operations without proper support. You stack body bags doing that. You also stack them waiting for bureaucracy. She said it without heat, not as a challenge. As a fact, the way you state a fact when you have verified it enough times that the emotion has burned away and only the information remains. I have run this scenario. Sniper interdiction, clear the approach. Ground element extracts the wounded in the window before artillery is even approved. We move now. We get everyone home. We wait. We write one family a different letter. You are asking me to commit a team to an active firefight based on 12 years and 217 confirmed engagements. She held his eyes. I am not asking you to believe I can do this. I am asking you to give me 17 minutes. The radio crackled. Shadow 2 to base. We are taking sustained fire. Harwick is unconscious. Request immediate support. We cannot hold it. Lieutenant. Ryan Callis's voice was the voice of a man who had been trained to control his breathing under stress and was using every piece of that training right now to hold the sentence together. Fowler looked at the radio. He looked at the map. He looked at Sarah Quinn. If you are wrong, he said, they all die, and that is your signature. Sarah picked up her rifle case. Then you will have time to say, you told me so. She paused at the door. But I am not wrong. The briefing room held 8 operators, and the air inside it had the density of something that had already been decided. All that remained was the argument. Sarah spread the satellite imagery across the table and marked it without preamble. She did not introduce herself. She did not acknowledge the looks. She picked up the marker and drew. And the lines she drew were specific grid coordinates. Elevation markers, the 3 overlapping fire lanes that had pinned Shadow 2 into a ravine 300 meters south of the infill point. 12 hostiles, she said. PKMs here, and here. RPG element here at the southern position. High ground with interlocking fire. The ravine is a kill box. Any ground approach from the west gets cut apart before it reaches 60 meters. Tad Gifford had his arms crossed and his jaw set, but he was looking at the map. Really looking at it. That was something. You are describing a box with no good angles, he said. His Boston came through on every syllable. So what is the play? Sarah pointed to a ridge 800 meters from the center hostile cluster. That high point gives clear sight lines on all 3 PKM positions and direct view of the RPG element. I take it with my spotter, full thermal overlay. While I engage from Overwatch, the ground element, Stage is here, 500 meters out, and moves on my signal. 800 meters in the dark. Sloan said it from the back of the room, leaned against the wall with his arms folded, the picture of a man who has already heard the punchline and did not find it funny. With 12 guns returning fire. 11 after the first shot. That is cute. It is math. She set down the marker and looked at him directly. What is your specific concern, Sloan? The range, the visibility, or whether I can make the shot? All three. Fair. She pulled out her service record and put it on the table. She did not make a speech about it. She just put it down and let him read the numbers. 217 confirmed kills. 11 years of active service. Average engagement distance, 640 meters. Longest confirmed shot, 1,380 meters, Helmand Province, 2007. Zero friendly fire incidents. The room was quiet in the specific way a room gets quiet when everyone is doing the same math simultaneously. Sloan looked at the paper. He looked at it for 3 full seconds, which was 2 seconds longer than he intended to look at it. From the back of the room, Marcus Holt pushed off the wall and said 4 words. I have spotted for her. That was it. Nothing else. He sat down. But Marcus Holt had been in special operations for 15 years, and in that time had accumulated the kind of reputation that does not get announced. It just exists in the way that dangerous things exist quietly without needing to explain themselves. When Marcus Holt said 4 words and sat down, the room shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once. Gifford looked at Marcus, then at Sarah, then at the map, and picked up his rifle. Dana Merritt, the team's staff sergeant, gave a single nod, the nod of a person who has assessed a situation and reached a conclusion and sees no value in making a production of it. One by one, the others followed. Sloan waited longest. He unfolded his arms, looked at the service record one more time, and then reached for his kit. He did not say anything. Not yes, not fine, not anything. He just started gearing up. Sarah checked her watch. 14 minutes. The armored vehicle took 12 of those minutes. It was not a comfortable 12 minutes. The road northeast of FOB Blessing was less a road than an agreement between 2 parties, the vehicle and the terrain, that had broken down repeatedly and been renegotiated in the dark by men who had other things to worry about. The vehicle bucked and slammed over dried creek beds and loose shale, its suspension absorbing what it could and passing the rest directly into the spines of everyone inside. Sarah sat in the rear, her rifle case across her knees, and did not hold the overhead strap. She was running numbers. Temperature 31 degrees Fahrenheit. Dropping. Density altitude approximately 7,000 feet, which would affect bullet trajectory measurably at anything past 600 meters. Wind at this elevation was variable. The valley created channels that compressed and shifted airflow in ways that could not be predicted, precisely only read in real time. She had learned to read them from a man who had learned it in a different valley, in a different decade under different stars. Her father had been stationed twice without her. She had not understood that the first time he left and had understood it completely by the second time, because the second time he came back different in a way she could not name at 9 years old, but understood fully by 12. The change was in his hands. Before, they were always doing something, fixing things, building things, finding the specific angle required to make something work that had stopped working. After the second deployment, they were sometimes just still, resting on a table or a knee not quite connected to whatever he was looking at. The rifle had been the thing that brought them back. She remembered the first session clearly, though she had not tried to. It was a Saturday in the fall, dry Texas air, with a smell of cedar, and he had set up a line of empty soup cans at 100 yards on the fence post behind their property. She was too small to hold the rifle off a standing position, so he had her go prone flat on the ground. Bipod extended the stock fitting into the pocket of her shoulder, the way he showed her his hand over hers to set the grip. Don't fight it, he said. The rifle wants to stay still. Your job is to stop disturbing it. She had hit the first can on her third shot, not by accident. She felt the difference between the third trigger press and the first 2, felt the moment when everything aligned without her forcing it, and knew before the round landed. Her father said nothing for a moment. Then, that is it. That is exactly that. He had never sounded more certain of anything. He was dead by the time she made it to Naval Special Warfare. 15 months after she got her Trident, FOB Blessing, was already a name on a map, and Gunnery Sergeant Ray, Quinn Marine Corps, 24 years, Beirut, 1983. Panama, 1989. Desert Storm, 1991, was in a VA hospital in San Antonio. His body finally settling the accounts it had been running since a car bomb went off 200 feet from his position in Lebanon and left half a pound of shrapnel that no surgeon had ever fully located. He had died in the winter. She had gone home for the burial and stayed 2 weeks, which was the longest she had been home in 4 years. Her mother, Catherine Quinn, had sat with her at the kitchen table on the last night before Sarah's return flight and had held both of Sarah's hands in both of hers and had said it simply the way her mother said everything. "Promise me you will not be him. Promise me you will come back." Sarah had promised. She had meant it. She had spent the 2 years since making good on it, commanding, planning, directing, running operations where other people pulled triggers, and she made the decisions that put them in position to do it. She had been good at it. She was better at this. But a promise was a promise, and she had made it looking directly into her mother's eyes with her father not yet cold in the ground. The vehicle lurched hard to the left, and Sarah steadied her rifle case with one hand. 13 minutes had elapsed, 1 minute remaining. She looked down at the case. Standard locking clasps worn smooth from 10,000 operations of being opened and closed. Inside, she knew without seeing it, the Macmillan TAC 338 in point, 338 Lapua Magnum, the rifle she had carried through 4 deployments, the rifle she knew the way, a language you learned before you knew you were learning it. At 800 meters with a 15-mile-per-hour crosswind, the round would drop approximately 22 inches and drift 4.5 inches right. She did not need to calculate this. It lived in her hands. The vehicle stopped. Marcus Holt looked at her across the dark interior. He had been a spotter for 11 years. He had worked with 14 different shooters. He had the specific quality of a person who has seen enough versions of the same thing to recognize it instantly. What competence looked like at rest, what it looked like under pressure, how those two things were sometimes the same and sometimes drastically different. He had worked with Sarah Quinn for 6 days in Paktika province 18 months ago. 6 days in which she had made 7 shots at distances between 500 and 900 meters in conditions that range from difficult to the kind of thing you do not put in the official report because the margin that made it possible was technically outside the parameters of what the report can accommodate. He opened the door. The cold came in immediately, mountain cold, with an edge to it, the kind that found the gap between your collar and your neck and committed to it. Sarah was already out of the vehicle. She had not said anything on the drive. She had not looked at her phone or checked her messages or made any of the small social gestures that people use to fill silence. She had run her numbers and remembered her father and made the decision she had already made the moment she heard Harwick's voice on that radio, even if she had not acknowledged it until now. She opened the rifle case. Behind her, the rest of Recon Shadow was dismounting and spreading into a defensive perimeter, standard procedure. No instruction required the muscle memory of operators who had done this in enough darkness that the darkness was no longer a variable. Dana Merritt had the ground element organized in 90 seconds. Gifford had the eastern flank. Sloan was already prone behind a boulder, rifle forward, watching the valley. Sarah lifted the TAC 338 from its case. The weight of it settled into her hands. 3,048 meters to Shadow 2's position. 217 confirmed engagements. 1,380 meters, Helmand's province. 2007. Her father's hands on hers, setting the grip. "Don't fight it." She looked at Marcus. He was already moving toward the ridge with the spotter's scope over his shoulder, not waiting for her to say, "Let's go." Because in 6 days in Paktika, he had learned that she did not say, "Let's go." She was either moving or she was not. And when she was moving, the appropriate response was to move with her. 12 minutes had elapsed since she stepped off that vehicle. Shadow 2 had been in that ravine for 52 minutes. Sarah Quinn started up the ridge, the rifle in her hands, the cold mountain air coming down hard from the peaks. To the north, and somewhere in the dark below, Harwick was still breathing. For now. Her father had taught her one more thing the last time she saw him conscious. 3 days before the end, his voice thin and his hands still for long stretches before they were not. "The rifle does not care who holds it," he said. "Only whether you hold it right." She held it right. She always had. Ahead, the observation point, a broken stone shelter, half-collapsed, dangerously exposed, 800 meters from 12 men who did not yet know she was there. Behind, the only question that had ever mattered, whether she would use it. She already had. The observation point was not so much a structure as the memory of one. Someone had built it decades ago. Soviet era most likely, given the construction method, flat stones stacked without mortar, in the way the mountain people had learned to build by watching the mountains themselves heavy, at the base narrowing toward the top, relying on weight and gravity for what Western engineers solved with chemistry. The roof had been gone for years. 3 walls remained, the 4th reduced to rubble that had tumbled outward and come to rest in a rough fan shape down the eastern slope. What was left gave a man standing inside it coverage from three directions and a clear line of sight to the south and northeast, which was Sarah suspected exactly why it had been built there to begin with. She came over the final approach in a low-crawl rifle held parallel to the ground, elbows taking the weight so the thermal scope's housing did not contact the stone and produce a sound that carried. Marcus was 6 meters behind her, moving on his right side, the spotter's scope in a soft case against his chest, his breath measured and quiet. Sarah reached the wall and pressed against it. She waited. The valley below was dark in the way deep water is dark, not empty, but full of things that did not need light to exist. She could hear nothing specific. General wind. The distant percussion of automatic fire that had been going on for almost an hour, regular enough, now that the ear had begun to process it as background rather than event. That was the most dangerous kind of adaptation. The moment your body stopped treating incoming fire as an alarm was the moment you needed to remind it why the alarm existed. Marcus settled beside her. She looked at him. He shook his head once. No movement on their approach. Nobody had tracked them up. She moved into position. The broken northern wall gave her a rest point at exactly the right height for a prone setup not designed for it, but close enough that two adjustments of the bipod legs put the rifle flat and stable. She extended the bipod, set the cheek weld, and brought the thermal scope online. The valley lit up, not with light, with heat. The thermal overlay translated the darkness into a landscape of temperature differentials, cold rock showing in dark gray, warm air rising from the ravine floor, in soft gradients, in human bodies burning white-hot against the ambient chill. Sarah counted them automatically the way she had been trained and the way her father had taught her before she knew she was being trained at all. 12. Positioned exactly as the satellite imagery had predicted, with one adjustment, the northern PKM team had shifted approximately 20 meters east since the last image was captured, probably in response to Shadow 2 attempting to flank them in the early minutes of the ambush. That shift mattered. It opened a gap in their coverage of the ravine floor, and more importantly, it meant the northern gunner now had a slight exposure on his right flank that had not existed in the briefing room. Sarah cataloged this and moved on. Marcus had the rangefinder up. He was feeding her data in a low, even voice, the professional voice, not the conversational one, stripped of everything except information. Southern position 4 hostiles, 1 probable commander, range 8 to 12. Wind 3.5, left to right, angle 15 degrees downhill. Sarah dialed the corrections. The Southern commander was the right call for a first engagement. She had explained this in the briefing room, and she did not need to explain it again here, not to Marcus, who understood it the same way she did from the same training filtered through different years of application. Remove the command element first, and you do 2 things simultaneously. You eliminate the person most capable of adapting to the contact, and you send a message to every other fighter in that valley that the threat they are facing knows exactly what it is doing. Fear was not a weapon exactly, but confusion was. And a commander dropping from a suppressed rifle at 800 meters with no muzzle flash visible and no sound that could be directionally identified produced confusion at a level that 3 more shots could not achieve if the first shot had been a random kill. She found him in the scope. He was crouched behind a boulder at the southern end of the position, signaling to a fighter on his left with the specific economy of movement that identified a trained soldier. No wasted gesture, no telegraph. He was good. Probably had been doing this for years in this same valley, in this same cold, against different versions of the same enemy. Sarah had been doing it longer. Wind holds, Marcus said. Her breath went out slowly. The crosshairs settled. Her finger moved inside the guard and found the trigger face and rested there without pressure, without anticipation, waiting for the moment the breath completed and the world stopped moving. The trigger broke. The suppressed report was a flat, compressed crack, not silent, never silent, but directionally ambiguous in a way that a standard muzzle blast was not. The round traveled 812 meters in just under 1 second. The Southern commander's body dropped straight down without any of the drama that movies assign to it. He was there crouched and signaling. Then he was not. Beneath her, the valley detonated, not with additional fire, with panic. The remaining 11 fighters reacted the way trained fighters react to an invisible contact noise movement in misdirection. They called to each other, dove for cover, and oriented their weapons in approximately the right direction, which was unfortunately not the direction she was in. The northern PKM team swung east. The eastern position went flat. 3 fighters at the center broke west toward a tree line that would give them cover from the direction they believed the shot had come from. They were wrong, and wrong was exactly what she needed them to be. Northern PKM, Marcus said. range 790. He is still sweeping east. She was already there. The northern gunner had his weapon oriented away from her, his body presenting a three-quarter angle that reduced the target profile but did not eliminate it. She made the correction for the reduced range, felt the wind shift a half count in her right ear, compensated and broke the trigger. The round hit him in the upper back. He came off the weapon sideways, and the PKM clattered down the slope with a sound she could hear from 800 meters in the cold air. Two down, Marcus said. East position is going to ground. Center 3 still moving west. Let them. She cycled the bolt. The spent casing ejected and rang against the stone and rolled into a crack and was gone. She chambered the next round with the smooth, unhurried movement of someone for whom the action was not an action at all, but simply the space between the previous shot and the next one. Tad Gifford's voice came over the team frequency. He had dropped his usual Boston edge. What remained was pure information. Commander, 2 targets down confirmed. East position is static. RPG element has not moved. Hold your position, she said. Do not advance until I clear the RPG. Copy? 8 minutes had passed since she had settled into the observation point. In that time, 5 targets had been neutralized, 2 PKM teams, and 3 fighters caught in poor cover during their westward movement. She had not missed. Not once. Not at 790 meters, not at 812, not at the running shot on the 3rd fighter, who had made the mistake of crossing open ground between 2 rock formations in a straight line, as if straight lines were safe. They were not safe. Nothing that moved in a predictable pattern was safe. Marcus was tracking the RPG element. Southern position remnant. 2 fighters, 1 with the tube. Range 850. Wind has shifted, now pushing 5 left to right, gusting to 8. The RPG changed the geometry entirely. Everything else in the valley was a threat to Shadow 2 at contact range, effective out to 300 meters, with an AK maybe 400 with discipline and good conditions. The PKM teams had been the priority because their effective range extended into the ravine from their elevated positions. But the RPG was a different problem. An RPG-7 round fired from the southern position at the ravine where Shadow 2 was pinned would not need to be accurate to be catastrophic. It needed to be approximately correct, and approximately correct at that range was well within the capability of a man who had been living in this valley his entire adult life. She found the carrier through the thermal scope. He was moving between rocks using the terrain intelligently, keeping the tube low. He understood that the tube was a signature that anyone watching with optics would identify it immediately. He was trying not to give her the moment she needed. Range now 860, Marcus said, gusting to 9. Sarah made the correction. The gust was the problem, not its magnitude, but its irregularity. A steady 8-mile-per-hour crosswind was a calculation. A gust was a window. She needed to find the trough between gusts, the 2 or 3 seconds of relative calm that occurred in every variable wind pattern, and put the round through that window. She waited. He is loading, Marcus said, flat voice, no inflection, just the fact. The RPG carrier had ducked behind a cluster of rocks and was preparing to load the weapon. She could see his hands working in the thermal overlay, the heat signature of the round itself slightly brighter than the ambient rock temperature. She felt the wind on her left cheek drop. 1 second, maybe 2. She exhaled and broke the trigger, 917 meters. The round took just over a second to arrive. She watched through the scope as the carrier stumbled backward, the RPG tube tumbling from his hands and coming to rest against the rock face at an angle that meant it was going nowhere dangerous. The 2nd fighter at the southern position ran. RPG neutralized, Marcus said. 7 down, 5 remaining, splitting east and north. Ground element has a window. Sarah keyed the radio. Shadow 2, this is Overwatch. Path is open. Move now. Ground element advance. Callis came back immediately. His voice had the quality of a man who has been holding a breath for 53 minutes and is not yet ready to release it because he has been surprised before. Copy Overwatch. Moving. Below, she could see the heat signatures of Recon Shadow's ground element rising from their staging position and beginning to move toward the ravine Merritt, on point Gifford covering the eastern approach. Sloan moving wide on the left flank with the rolling ground covering stride of a man who had done exactly this in exactly this kind of terrain for the better part of a decade. She tracked the remaining 5 fighters. 2 were moving north trying to find an angle. 2 were pulling back southeast, which put them away from both Shadow 2 and the ground element. The 5th had gone static behind a large boulder formation near the center of the valley and had not moved in 40 seconds, which meant he was either wounded, waiting, or both. Static target center valley, she said. Got him, Marcus said. Range 710. He is not moving. He will. She moved her crosshairs to the northern pair instead. They were trying to angle toward the ground element's approach, not to engage the extraction directly, but to get to a position from which they could. She found the lead man first tracked his movement, led him by the calculation required at 780 meters for a target moving at a walking pace, and fired. He went down mid-stride. The second man dove immediately. Good instinct, wrong direction. He dove toward open ground rather than toward the rock cover that would have made him a harder problem. She had the second shot ready before he stopped moving and placed it. 9 down, Marcus said. A round cracked in from the east, not the Barrett, not yet something smaller. A lucky angle from one of the retreating fighters, finding a line of sight that had not existed 30 seconds earlier. It hit the stone 6 inches from Marcus's left shoulder and fragmented. He grunted, once sharp and involuntary, and his left arm dropped away from the spotter's scope. I am fine, he said before she could ask. He was not fine, not entirely. She could hear it in the compression of those 3 words. But he was functional, and in that moment, functional was the only category that mattered. He shifted the scope to his right hand and continued reading the valley. The static target behind the center boulder broke cover at the sound of those 2 shots, which was what she had expected. People who froze under fire generally froze because they believed that stillness was safety, and when the shots came close enough to make stillness feel dangerous, they moved. He ran south. She tracked him, compensated for the downhill angle and his speed, and fired. 10 down. Marcus lowered the spotter's scope briefly and looked at her. Not with surprise exactly. With the expression of a man confirming something he had already known, but was still good to have confirmed. 2 remaining fighters were now in full retreat, moving southeast toward the vehicle track that led out of the valley. She watched them go. Pursue, Gifford asked over comms. Negative, Sarah said. Mission is Shadow 2. Let them go. Below the ground element reached the ravine. She could see the heat signatures converging. Merritt's team moving to the pinned Shadow 2 operators, Callus rising from behind the boulder cluster where he had been for the past hour, the smaller heat signature of Harwick being lifted and carried, 2 people supporting him between them, moving back along the extraction corridor she had spent the last 11 minutes clearing. Shadow 2 personnel accounted for, Merritt said over comms. Her voice was flat and professional, the voice of a person who does not celebrate until everyone is in the vehicle. Harwick is unconscious but breathing, moving to extraction point. Sarah did not respond. She was already scanning. The 2 fighters had stopped retreating. She found them in the thermal overlay, 300 meters southeast of their last position, stopped oriented back toward the valley. Not running anymore. Something had changed their calculus. She tracked the heat signatures and found the answer in the larger of the 2, a long distinctive silhouette across his shoulders. Barrett M82, 50 caliber, anti-material rifle. Her chest registered the information before her mind processed its full weight. The M82 was not a fighter's weapon. It was not something that appeared in a mountain valley ambush carried by irregular forces. It was a precision instrument that required training, maintenance, and a supply chain that did not exist on this side of the border without deliberate assistance. The man carrying it was not a militiaman who had picked up a weapon from a cache. He was a specialist, and he had waited, had stayed back, stayed hidden, let the ambush play out until the moment when he knew where she was. Marcus, she said, I see it. The first round came while she was still speaking. It hit the stone wall 6 inches to the left of her rifle, and the impact was categorically different from anything she had heard in the last 12 minutes. Not the sharp crack of an intermediate cartridge, but the concussive thud of a 50 caliber round striking solid rock, a sound you felt in your back teeth before you heard it in your ears. Stone fragments sprayed. She was already rolling, right, pulling the rifle with her, getting her body behind the thicker section of the remaining wall. Southwest, Marcus said, flat and immediate. 900 meters, behind the dead tree. He was waiting. She processed this. 900 meters. The Barrett at 900 meters in cold air was effective to well beyond what she was carrying. The 50 caliber round retained energy at distances that made her TAC 338 a more limited platform by comparison. He had the range advantage, and he had elevation, and he had spent the last 11 minutes watching her work, learning her rhythm, identifying her position. A second round struck the wall where her rifle had rested, exactly where her rifle had rested. He is walking them in, Marcus said. His voice was steady despite the arm. That was Marcus. The arm was a fact. The spotter's job continued. She had 3 seconds to make a decision. The observation point had given her everything she needed for the last 12 minutes: elevation, sight lines, stable rest. It had now become the thing that would kill her. Any shooter with a deliberate zero at 900 meters and a clear line of sight could work through this position systematically. The wall would stop fragments and slow debris, but it would not stop a 50 caliber round at this distance. Nothing short of reinforced concrete would. She keyed the radio. Ground element status. 2 minutes from extraction point, Merritt said. Harwick is stable. We are moving. 2 minutes. She needed 2 minutes, and she needed the Barrett shooter engaged or relocated. Marcus Western approach. Dry creek bed. That is 800 meters of exposure to get to 500. Not if we use the creek bed. It will cover us to within 550. He looked at her for one count. Sarah, he is sitting on top of a slope with a clear field of fire. The second we move, he will reorient, which is why you are going to draw his attention while I move. A third round came in lower. This time he was adjusting, walking the rounds down toward where a prone shooter would naturally be positioned. Smart. Methodical. If I draw him, I am the target, Marcus said, for approximately 6 seconds. Then I am around the first turn in the creek bed, and he loses the angle. She was already moving as she said it, backing along the inner wall to where the rubble provided enough cover to get vertical without presenting a silhouette to the southwest. She felt Marcus shift beside her and knew without looking that he had understood the plan and was repositioning. She heard him fire a single shot aimed at nothing in particular, designed to produce a muzzle flash and a target indicator at the observation point while she was no longer at the observation point. The Barrett answered immediately. She was running. The ground between the observation point and the creek bed was 40 meters of broken scree and loose rock, and she covered it low and fast, rifle across her chest, each footfall calculated to make the minimum noise and the minimum contact time with the ground. She heard the Barrett fire twice more behind her. Marcus was doing his job, staying mobile, not giving the shooter a stationary target. She hit the creek bed and dropped into it. The dry creek bed was a natural ditch 3 to 4 feet deep, cutting through the slope at an angle that provided concealment from the southwest and a natural path toward the far end of the valley where the Barrett's shooter was positioned. It would not give her the range advantage. At 500 meters, both rifles were effective. What she would have was surprise, and surprise was a multiplier that compensated for a great deal. She moved through the creek bed at a controlled pace, rifle forward, using the thermal scope in passive mode to read the terrain ahead. The shooter was behind a dead tree on the southwestern ridge. She had the bearing from Marcus's report and the trajectory of the incoming rounds. At 500 meters with a clear shot, she could work with this. Marcus came over comms. He has moved, repositioning north. 40 meters. She adjusted her bearing calculation. He knows you went somewhere, Marcus said. He is hunting now. That was the nature of counter-sniper work. Once the observation point was compromised, it became a game of angles, who could find the other's new position first, who could make the shot in the window between acquisition and reaction. The Barrett shooter had training. He had held his position for the entire engagement, controlled. His timing waited for the right moment. That indicated patience and discipline. He would not panic now. He would work through this systematically. She needed to be less systematic than he expected. She came around the final turn in the creek bed and found a position behind a granite outcropping that gave her an elevated rest at approximately 530 meters from the dead tree's last known position. She brought the scope up and swept the ridgeline. He was not behind the dead tree. Marcus, where? Moving, he is still. Wait, he stopped. South of the tree, 20 meters, behind a boulder. He is setting up. South of the tree, 20 meters. She swept the scope and found the boulder Marcus was describing large, irregular, lighter in thermal than the surrounding rock because it had been sitting in direct line of the valley wind and had cooled faster than the sheltered stones around it. No heat signature behind it. Then a shape shifted just slightly at the boulder's left edge. He was pressed flat against the right side of the boulder, using it as both cover and concealment, with only the left edge visible from her angle. She could see the outline of his shoulder and the stock of the rifle, the distinctive length of the Barrett M82, unmistakable even in thermal. He had not seen her yet. She had perhaps 4 seconds before his sweep brought him to her position. She made the wind call from instinct and memory, and the feel of the air against her left cheek in this specific spot on the slope settled the crosshairs at the visible edge of the shoulder, calculated the angle correction for the downhill position. And he turned. The scope found her at the same moment she found him. Both shooters fired. The Barrett round hit the granite outcropping 4 inches from her face. The granite did not stop it. It deflected it fractionally enough that the round passed above her head, but the impact threw a sharp fragment of stone that was approximately 2 centimeters in diameter and moving at a velocity that is not accurately described but is accurately felt directly into her right eye. The pain was immediate and absolute, and she did not stop. Her round had already left the barrel before the fragment hit her. She had broken the trigger in the same moment he had, and she had broken it cleanly. And at 530 meters, a clean trigger break with a properly zeroed rifle in .338 Lapua Magnum was not a guess. She heard the Barrett stop. In the thermal scope through her left eye, her right eye was already closing involuntarily, the lid coming down over something that was producing a sensation she was categorizing as damage rather than pain. Because pain was a category she did not have time for. She watched the heat signature behind the boulder move sharply once, and then not again. The Barrett did not fire a second time. Marcus said, "Target down." She did not respond immediately. She kept the scope up and scanned for 30 full seconds, checking every heat signature in the southwestern quadrant, making certain there was no secondary shooter, no backup position, no flanker she had not accounted for. There was nothing. The valley, for the first time in over an hour, held only the heat signatures of her own people. "Shadow 2 is at extraction," Merritt said over comms. "Loading now. Harwick is in. We are ready to move." Sarah pressed her back against the outcropping. Her right eye was completely closed. She could feel the warmth of blood on her cheekbone, not a large amount, not the kind of bleeding that took a person out of the fight, but a consistent seep that told her the fragment had done something real. She pressed the back of her hand against it and breathed. 4 counts in. Hold. 8 counts out. "Overwatch to all elements," she said. Her voice was level. "Threat neutralized. Extraction is clear. Ground element moved to the vehicles." Gifford came back over comms. His Boston had returned, and it was subdued in a way that Boston rarely was. "Copy, Commander." Gifford confirms 0 friendly casualties. A pause, not procedural but human. "Good work up there." He said up there the way you say it when you have seen something you do not fully have language for yet. She stayed against the rock for another 30 seconds. Then she stood, picked up the rifle, and began moving back toward the staging area. Her right eye stayed closed. Her left eye was enough. Marcus found her at the creek bed entrance coming from the north. He had a field dressing in his hand. He looked at her eye, then at her face, then at his own left arm, hanging at an angle that was not quite right then, back at the dressing. She shook her head once. "On the vehicle." He did not argue. They moved together down the slope toward the staging area without speaking. Behind them, the valley was quiet in the way valleys become quiet after sustained fire. Not peaceful, but empty. The absence of sound carrying the weight of everything that had just occupied it. Sloan was standing at the vehicle when they arrived. He looked at her face, the blood, the closed eye, the way she was carrying the rifle, as if none of the above constituted a reason to carry it differently. He opened his mouth and then closed it. He stepped aside to make room for her at the vehicle door. He did not say anything. She noticed. The drive back to FO Blessing took 13 minutes. Sarah sat with her back against the vehicle wall and allowed Marcus to tape the field dressing over her right eye with his good hand. He did it without asking questions, which she appreciated. He had been in enough vehicles, coming back from enough things to understand the difference between the time for questions and the time for silence. Her mind was running the engagement. The Barrett shooter was the detail that would not settle. The M82 was a NATO weapon. It appeared in a valley ambush conducted by irregular fighters who, based on every other piece of equipment in that engagement, should not have had access to it. She filed the thought precisely and moved past it. The time for that question was not on a 13-minute drive in an armored vehicle. The time for that question was when it could be answered. The FOB's lights became visible 3 minutes out. Captain Grant Fowler was standing outside the operations center when the vehicle came through the gate. He stood with his arms at his sides, which for Fowler was an unusual posture. He was typically a man who folded his arms, which was a posture that said, "I have already assessed this situation." Arms at his sides said something different. It said that the assessment was still in process. He watched Sarah step down from the vehicle. He saw the field dressing and the blood and the rifle and the way she moved, which was the same way she had moved walking across that landing pad 6 hours ago, like someone who knew exactly what her body weighed and where the weight was and had long since stopped thinking about it. He stood straight, not at attention. He was not performing a ceremony, and she would not have wanted him to. Just straight. The posture of a man who has seen something and is acknowledging that he has seen it without words, because the words would make it smaller. She passed him on the way to the operations center, and he said nothing. She said nothing. The operations center was lit and warm and smelled exactly as it had 6 hours ago. Sarah set the rifle case on the table and sat down in front of the incident log. The medic, a young sergeant named Rourke, who had the permanent expression of a man who had seen things he wished he could unknow, sat beside her and began assessing her eye with a penlight. Hold still. How is Harwick? En route to Bagram. Vitals stabilized in the vehicle. He moved the light across her pupil. She felt it as a vague shape, nothing more. You are going to need imaging on this. After the report. Commander. After the report. Rourke sat back and looked at her with the expression of a man who was constructing an argument and then on reflection deciding not to make it. He reached for clean gauze. She opened the incident log and began writing. From the doorway of the operations center, Derek Sloan stood and watched her fill in the form with her left eye, her right eye behind the dressing, her handwriting unchanged from what it would have been 6 hours ago. He watched for approximately 30 seconds. Then he turned and walked away without saying anything. In a corner of the operations center, Tad Gifford sat on an equipment case with his coffee, finally cold, and watched the mountains through the small high window. He was thinking about the pause at the landing pad, that 1 second Sarah had taken to read the base when she stepped off the helicopter. He understood now what she had been calculating. He had not understood it then. She finished the report and set down the pen. Outside, the mountains were still there. They were always still there. The imaging took 40 minutes. Sergeant Rourke had a portable ultrasound unit and a penlight and 15 months of battlefield medicine experience, which was enough to tell him what he was looking at, but not enough to tell him exactly what it meant over the next 6 months. He documented what he saw, wrote his notes in the careful, unembellished language of a medic who understood that medical records were legal documents as much as clinical ones, and then he sat across from Sarah Quinn in the aid station and told her what he had found. Retinal contusion, right eye, possible partial detachment. I cannot confirm that without imaging equipment I do not have here. Vision loss in that eye is currently... He checked his notes, though he did not need to. He was buying time to find the right framing. Significant. Define significant. You have light perception and some peripheral shape. Central vision is compromised. Sarah looked at him with her left eye. Permanently. Rourke set down his pen. I cannot tell you that here. What I can tell you is that you need a surgical consult within 48 hours, and that the longer that window extends, the narrower the options become. She absorbed this the way she absorbed ballistic data, not with emotion attached to it, but with the specific quality of attention that a person gives to information that is going to require decisions. She had known since the granite fragment hit her that something real had happened. The darkness in her right eye was not the darkness of shock or bruising. It was the darkness of something that had been working correctly and had stopped the way a precision instrument stops when a component fails. Medevac to Bagram, she said. First available is 0600. All right. Rourke looked at her for a moment. He was 26 years old and had been in Afghanistan for 8 months and had sat with people in this aid station after things that were much worse than what she was describing. He had learned that the ones who took bad news quietly were not always the ones who were handling it well. Sometimes they were doing something else entirely, filing it in a place where it could not interfere with what still needed to be done, which was a skill that looked like composure from the outside, but was not quite the same thing. Is there anything else you need tonight? He asked. No, she said. Thank you, Sergeant. She meant it. He heard that she meant it and nodded once and left her alone. The aid station was a prefab room with 4 cots, 2 of which were occupied by Shadow 2 operators with minor wounds being held overnight for observation. Both of them were still with the particular quiet of people who understood that the woman on the other side of the partition had earned whatever silence she needed. Sarah sat on the edge of the empty cot. She reached into her kit and found her phone. The satellite signal at FO Blessing was marginal at the best of times, and the battery icon showed 11%, which gave her approximately 1 call. She dialed. Her mother picked up on the second ring, which meant she had not been sleeping. Catherine Quinn had not fully slept since the night her husband came home from Desert Storm with shrapnel. She could feel through his shirt when she held him at the airport, and she had learned over 23 years to rest in the space between full wakefulness and sleep close enough to both that she could reach either one quickly. Sarah. Not a question. A fact. The fact of her daughter's voice identified in a single syllable, the way you identify the voices you have been listening for. Mom. She paused. Rourke was across the room pretending to organize his kit. I am okay. Are you? It was not quite a question either. Her mother had a gift for sentences that were technically interrogative, but functionally something else. Not doubt, but depth. The question behind the question. Sarah looked at the rifle case on the table. She looked at the incident log. She looked at the small window in the far wall through which she could see the darkness of the Kunar Valley, the mountains holding their shape against the slightly lighter darkness of the sky above them. "I was him tonight," she said. "I think he would have been okay with that." The silence on the other end of the line was long and specific, not empty. The kind of silence a person holds when they are doing something important with what they just heard. "Come home, baby." "I will," Sarah said. She held the phone for a moment after the call ended, the screen going dark, the battery at 9%. She lay back on the cot without removing her boots and was asleep before she finished the thought. Captain Grant Fowler knocked on the operations center door at 0730 and found Sarah at the table with a cup of coffee she had not touched, writing the final section of the after-action report with a pen light because the overhead fluorescent had a flicker that had been bothering everyone for 2 weeks and no one had fixed it. She looked up. He came in and closed the door and stood for a moment the way large men stand in small rooms when they are trying to find the right posture for something they have not had occasion to practice. His arms were at his sides again. "Commander Quinn," he said, "Captain Fowler." He sat down across from her without being invited, which was the first thing she had seen him do that matched nothing in the profile she had constructed of him over the past 18 hours. The Grant Fowler she had assembled from observation was a man who moved within defined channels, who knocked before entering, who waited to be addressed, who organized his authority by staying inside the procedures that had conferred it. Sitting down uninvited was outside that pattern. She waited. "I reviewed the preliminary after-action data," he said. 12 enemy combatants neutralized. 8 personnel extracted, including 1 critical casualty who is currently in surgery at Bagram and whose prognosis, as of an hour ago, the surgical team considers favorable. He paused. 0 friendly casualties. "Yes." The Barrett M82 recovered from the counter-sniper position. He set a printed photograph on the table. It was a close image of the rifle's receiver, the serial number clearly visible. "Our intelligence officer ran it this morning. It was reported destroyed in a depot fire in Kandahar in 2007. Evidently, it was not destroyed." Sarah looked at the photograph. She had been expecting something in this neighborhood since the moment she heard the round strike the wall beside her. The existence of the rifle asked a question that the rifle itself could not answer. "That is an intelligence matter," she said. Fowler set the photograph face down on the table. "NCIS has it now. It will be a long investigation." He paused. "Longer than either of us will be at this FOB." Sarah looked at the photograph face down. "Good," she said. "Then let them work." She meant it. Some things needed to be done slowly and correctly with the right tools by people whose job it was. She understood the difference now between problems she was built to solve and problems she was not. The Barrett was the latter. Fowler nodded once. "Then I was wrong," he said, "about your judgment, about your ability to execute under the conditions last night presented." He said it plainly without the qualifications that men of his particular background typically appended to admissions of this kind. "No, given the information I had at the time, no from my perspective." Just the statement unhedged. "I was wrong on both counts, and I wanted to say so directly." Sarah set down her pen. "In your position," she said, "I might have had the same doubts. Maybe." He did not seem to find that as comforting as she had perhaps intended it. "That does not make the doubts correct." "No," she agreed, "it does not." He stood. At the door he stopped with his back to her and said without turning around, "Your father served at Beirut." It was not a question. She had not put it in the file Fowler would have received, but Fowler had been in special operations long enough that a phone call to the right desk at Marine Corps HQ would have filled in what the file omitted. "Yes," she said, "I was in Beirut." He said it to the door. "Not in 83. I was there in 84 after. But I knew men who were there on October 23rd. A pause. Ray Quinn's name was in the station logs as one of the senior NCOs who organized the casualty response in the first hour after the bombing, before anyone else had a plan. Sarah was very still. "I did not know that," she said. "Most people do not." He opened the door. "It was a hell of a thing what he did that day. The record is there if you want to read it. I can get you the reference." He paused with his hand on the frame. "It would be worth reading." He left. Sarah sat with the untouched coffee for a long moment. Then she picked it up and drank it cold in 2 swallows and went back to the after-action report. The video call connected at 1400 hours. Admiral Christine Harlow appeared on the screen with the unhurried quality of a person who had been doing important things all morning and would continue doing them all afternoon, and had allocated exactly the right amount of time to this conversation, not a minute more or less. She was 61 with silver hair cut precisely and eyes that had the same quality as Sarah's, but had been using it for 30 more years, which gave it an additional depth that was not intimidating so much as clarifying. Commander Quinn, she looked at the dressing. I have reviewed the preliminary report and the drone footage. Sarah had not known about drone footage. She kept her face even. Ma'am, the engagement at the counter sniper position. Harlow said it simply. Both shots fired simultaneously. One shooter alive, one not. The drone had a direct overhead angle. She paused. I have watched it 4 times. I will probably watch it again. Sarah said nothing. 12 enemy combatants neutralized in a single engagement. 1 critical friendly casualty stabilized and en route to recovery. 0 losses among the extraction element or the PIN team. Harlow folded her hands on the desk in front of her. In 31 years, I have reviewed a great many after-action reports, Commander. What you did last night is not standard. It is not within the normal distribution of what trained operators accomplish under those conditions. I want you to understand that I am saying this as a statement of fact, not as a compliment. Understood, ma'am. You have been recommended for the Silver Star. The recommendation has cleared the initial review board and is sitting on my desk for final approval. Harlow looked at her steadily. I understand from your file that you declined a similar recognition after the Helmand engagement in 2007. I requested the nomination be withdrawn, yes. Why? It was the same kind of question her mother asked. Technically interrogative, functionally a request for the real answer rather than the official one. Sarah had learned a long time ago that admirals and mothers occasionally spoke the same language. Because the shot at Helmand was the longest in my record, and the framing of the recognition made that the story, Sarah said. Distance is a technical fact. It is not the whole thing. The whole thing includes the team that put me in position to take the shot, the intelligence that identified the target, and the 7 other operators who held their positions while I worked. A medal with my name on it in isolation misrepresents what actually happened. Harlow regarded her for a moment. And last night? Last night is different, Sarah said. How? Sarah looked at the wall beside the screen for a count of 2, finding the right words in the same unhurried way she found the right wind call, not rushing toward an answer, but waiting for the correct one to be available. Last night I broke a promise, she said, to my mother. I told her 2 years ago that I was done pulling triggers, that I would lead from behind the scope, not behind the rifle. She paused. Last night I made a decision that the promise was less important than Harwick's life, and I acted on that decision. That was mine. The outcome that followed, that was mine too. I am not trying to give it away. Harlow was quiet for a moment. The Silver Star approval will proceed, she said. It was not said unkindly. It was said the way facts are stated by people who have enough authority that the facts do not require a softer frame. You do not have to want it. You have to have done the thing that warranted it, and you did. She shifted slightly in her chair. There is a second matter. Ma'am, Naval Special Warfare Command is establishing a new long-range interdiction training program. Direct action sniper work in denied environments, the specific operational context you operated in last night. We have been discussing this program for 14 months and have not been able to identify the right person to build it. She paused. We have identified that person now. The silence that followed had weight to it, the kind that required something be placed upon it. Ma'am, Sarah said, I am a field operator. You were a field operator, Harlow said. Not unkindly, exactly as unkindly as the situation required. The imaging from Bagram will tell us the specifics of what you can and cannot do going forward. But I will tell you now, before those results arrive, that a training program of this kind is not a consolation. It is not what we give operators who can no longer function in the field. It is what we give operators who have a body of knowledge that cannot be replicated in a classroom by someone who has not lived it. Her voice was even and certain. You have 12 years of accumulated experience in long-range interdiction that exists nowhere else in our inventory in this combination. Every operator you train will carry a piece of that. Every engagement they survive because of something you taught them is an extension of what you did last night. Sarah looked at the screen. She thought about her father in Kuwait in 1991 between Beirut and the ground campaign, teaching a 9-year-old girl to set a grip on a rifle she could barely hold. She thought about what it had meant to him, not just the teaching, but the continuation of it. The knowledge that the thing he knew would not stop at the edge of his own life. The program, she said carefully, Would I have authority over curriculum design instructor selection? Complete authority. And the name. Harlow tilted her head slightly. The name of the program is at your discretion. Sarah was quiet for 3 seconds. Quinn Advanced Sniper Course, she said. Harlow did not ask who Quinn was. She had read the file. Approved, she said simply. The screen went dark. The medevac left FO Blessing at 0600 on a clear morning, with the Kunar Valley spread out below. In the first light, the mountains going from black to gray to the particular copper-brown of high Afghan terrain in November, ridge upon ridge, running into the distance until they blurred into the horizon. Sarah sat in the bird and looked at it through the window. She had been in this country for 4 deployments across 8 years and had seen this landscape at every hour and in every season. She had decided years ago that looking at it carefully was sufficient without requiring a judgment about whether it was beautiful or simply vast. She looked at it carefully now. She thought about the notebook she had started the previous night lesson plans, in dense small handwriting, 12 weeks of curriculum already taking shape. Wind reading, positional stability under fire, counter-sniper protocols, target priority sequencing. 12 years compressed into a structure that could be handed forward. She thought about the conversation she had not yet had with her mother about what the imaging results would mean and about a printed photograph of a serial number on a Barrett M82 that was now in the hands of people whose job it was to follow that thread wherever it led. She thought about her father's hands still at rest on a hospital blanket and about what he had understood that she was only now catching up to. The knowledge does not stop at the edge of your life. You find a way to send it forward. The bird banked east and the valley disappeared behind the mountains. Ahead was the gray-brown Afghan plateau stretching toward Bagram, and Sarah Quinn sat with her steady hands in her lap and looked forward through the window, one eye seeing clearly and one eye seeing nothing, and made her plans. The Bagram imaging suite was 12 degrees warmer than the valley and smelled of antiseptic and recycled air. She was in the surgical consultation room for 2 hours. The preliminary results were available the same afternoon. The formal document arrived 36 hours after the procedure, 2 pages precise clinical language that translated in plain terms to this 31% reduction in central visual acuity right eye permanent non-surgical. The partial retinal detachment had been addressed in a procedure that took 2 hours and was successful in preventing further deterioration. What had been lost would not return. What remained was stable. She read the document, once set it face down and lay on her back looking at the ceiling. 31%. She ran the calculation without wanting to. At 1,380 meters, the longest shot in her record, a 31% reduction in her dominant eye's visual acuity meant a margin of error she could not compensate for with the left eye alone at that distance. At 800 meters under ideal conditions, it was workable. Under combat conditions at night with a thermal overlay and a variable wind, the margin compressed to a place she could not honestly say she trusted. She lay there with that the way you lie with something when you have decided not to fight it. Her father had lain with things like this for years, the shrapnel that never came out, the hearing loss in his left ears from the Beirut blast, the knee that gave out entirely in 2003. He had been angry about some of it quietly in the specific way that men of his generation processed the gap between who they had been and what remained. But he had found the thing on the other side of that anger. She had watched him find it. The thing on the other side was not acceptance. It was redirection. She picked up the document and read it again this time, looking for the line that defined the boundary between what was finished and what was not. There were several things she could no longer do. There was one thing she could still do better than almost anyone alive. She turned the document face down and reached for the notebook. Marcus Holt found her 2 days later at the Bagram Range Facility, sitting on a low barrier with the notebook open on her knee and a pen moving in quick, short strokes. His left shoulder was in a sling. The wound from the valley had been cleaned and sutured at FOB Blessing and properly assessed here, and the sling was more about keeping him from using the arm reflexively than about any structural damage. He would be in it for 3 weeks, and then it would be as if it had never happened. He sat down beside her without being invited, which was his established practice. "What are you writing?" he asked. "Lesson plans." He looked at the notebook. Dense handwriting, very small, organized into sections with labeled subsections. "How many lessons?" he asked. 12 weeks of them. She did not stop writing. 5 days a week, mornings for fundamentals, afternoons for field application. That is a lot of curriculum. 12 years is a lot of curriculum. She turned a page. There is more material than there is time to teach it. The question is what you cut and in what order you teach the rest. Marcus was quiet for a moment, looking out at the range. He had the quality of a person who was preparing to say something he had been preparing to say for longer than the current conversation. I heard about the imaging results, he said. Word travels. Small community. He turned to look at her. I am sorry. Do not be. She said it without sharpness, which made it more definitive than sharpness would have. It was the cost of the outcome. The outcome was the right one. Those are not mutually exclusive, he said, the outcome being right and the cost being real. She stopped writing. She sat with that for a moment because Marcus Holt said very little, and when he said something, it was usually because the thing was true and needed to be acknowledged rather than absorbed in silence. It was, she thought, one of the things that made him a great spotter, the capacity to identify the one piece of information that changed the calculation and deliver it at the moment it was needed. No, she said, they are not. He nodded once, which was his version of a complete response to an emotional matter. The program, he said after a moment. I heard about that too. Also, word travels. I want in. She looked at him. You are still active. I'm active for another 2 years before I am mandatory boarded. I would rather spend those 2 years building something than cycling through another rotation. He shifted the sling slightly. I know how you work. I know what you know that is not written down anywhere. That does not transfer in 48 hours of onboarding. He paused. It transfers in 12 weeks if I am in the room helping you teach it. She looked at him for a long moment, the gray eyes that looked slightly past whatever they were focused on. I will put your name at the top of the instructor list, she said. He nodded again and they sat in silence for a while, looking at the range markers in the flat bagram light. Derek Sloan came to her the morning before her transfer paperwork was finalized. He did not knock. He stood in the open doorway of the consultation room for a moment, and then he came in and sat down across from her and set both hands on the table in a way that said he had decided to do this without quite knowing how to proceed now that he was doing it. She set down her pen. He looked at the dressing on her eye. He looked at the notebook open on the table. He looked at her hands, steady and at rest. I have been in this work for 9 years, he said. I have worked with 11 different commanders, not counting temporary assignments. 7 of them I would follow into a hot zone without a specific tactical concern. He said it the way someone recites the background to a conclusion they have already reached. Last night you made 11 decisions that I would not have changed in any of them, including the one about not pursuing the 2 fighters who ran. He paused. I would have pursued them. It would have been wrong. Sarah said nothing. She was listening. I want to explain why I was the way I was when you arrived, he said. Not to make it acceptable. I do not think it was acceptable, and I am not going to tell you that I had good reasons for it. I am going to tell you what the reason was. He looked at the table. The last commander I had who arrived on short notice and immediately overrode established protocol was wrong. Not wrong the way people are wrong in hindsight, wrong in the way that gets people killed. 3 of my team went home in boxes following a call that person made that was exactly the kind of call you made, fast, confident, based on their own assessment against the recommendation of everyone around them. He let that sit for a moment. That is not what happened, he said. No, Sarah agreed. I know the difference now. I knew the difference approximately 8 minutes into the engagement when you had already made 4 shots that I would have bet against and made them clean. He looked up. I should have known before that. I should have let the record speak before I decided you were the same pattern. Sarah looked at him for a moment. Skepticism is healthy, she said. The kind that comes from experience and costs something is healthy. What you are describing is not bias. It is pattern recognition that ran ahead of the evidence. She picked up her pen. The evidence is what it is now. So is the pattern recognition. He was quiet. For what it is worth, he said, I have already talked to 3 people about what happened. Not the numbers, the decisions, the sequencing. He stood. People are going to want to learn from this. That is the idea, she said. He looked at the notebook. Is that what that is? That is what that is. He nodded once with the specific quality of a nod that was doing the work of a longer sentence and left. On a cold morning at Fort Benning, Georgia, 12 weeks later, she stood behind a line of 14 students and watched them settle into position on the 100-meter line. The range stretched out in front of them in flat Georgia light, the air carrying a hint of pine and red clay that was as unlike the Kunar Valley as terrain could be and still be on the same planet. The targets were steel plates, 8-inch circles placed at distances that would increase by a factor of roughly 2 every 4 sessions, until by week 10, they were working at ranges that most instructors at most programs considered aspirational. Sarah had not considered them aspirational. She had considered them the baseline. She walked the line behind her by instance, watching their setups with one eye correcting a bipod angle here and a stock position there, saying very little, because the things that needed to be said in the next 12 weeks could not be front-loaded. They had to be built in sequence the same way her father had built them, in her one session at a time, each one contingent on the one before it. Marcus Holt stood at the far end of the line watching the same thing she was watching, occasionally making a small adjustment with his good right hand, saying nothing that did not need to be said. He had arrived at Fort Benning 4 days earlier, and they had spent those 4 days going through the curriculum together, testing each element against what they both knew from the places where curriculum met actual ground, refining the sequence until it had the right internal logic, not the logic of a classroom, but the logic of a valley at 0200 hours with 12 heat signatures and a clock running down. She stopped at the end of the line and looked out at the range. On the table behind her was the course roster and a single sheet of paper she had printed that morning and placed there before the students arrived. She did not draw attention to it. She did not make it a moment. It was simply there for anyone who looked. Quinn Advanced Sniper Course. Lesson 1, Week 1. The rifle does not care who holds it, only whether you hold it right. She looked out at the 8-inch circles at 100 meters. Then she looked further past them to the empty space at the back of the range where nothing was placed yet, where the distances they were working toward existed only as a number on a paper that her students could not yet imagine executing in the dark, in the cold, with everything depending on the next trigger press being exactly right. She would teach them. She had time. Her father had built something real in a 9-year-old girl standing on flat Texas scrubland, and that something real had been present in the Kunar Valley 3 months ago at the moment it was most needed, and had saved 8 lives. He had known it would outlast him. She understood now what that felt like from the other side. "Range is hot," she said. "When you are ready." The first shots came one after another down the line, uneven, and spread across the target face, which was exactly where they should be at the beginning of 12 weeks. She listened to each one without expression, cataloging what she heard against what she would teach tomorrow and the day after, the long patient work of making competence out of capacity, of taking what lived in her hands and finding a way to put it in theirs. 14 students, 12 weeks. The cold Georgia morning opening up around them, and the rifle in each pair of hands, finding its way, however slowly, toward quiet. Harwick made it home. So did she.